What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Tactical Breach Wizards. A review I'm kind of sneaking in here as it was not initially planned, but I had some free time, and people have been asking me to review this one since it launched back in August, so I knew I wanted to make the time. Now, to get my usual stuff out of the way, review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while that does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that. There's a link below covering everything I go over in a video, and my Steam profile is public and linked below as well. Now, in the case of Tactical Breach Wizards, it's a pretty easy 100%. The achievements are very thorough, but once you're done playing the game, you can go back and play through every single mission, adjust all your perks and everything, so it's very easy to track down exactly what you're missing, and start to finish, it's like a 20 to 30 hour experience, kind of depending on you a little bit. Not to mention, if you get stuck, there are plenty of guides for it out already since it released a while back. So as these things go, it's very tame. But what is this game actually about? What's going on with it? And I would say the best way to describe Tactical Breach Wizards is that meme that you may have seen hanging around every once in a while of a wizard holding a gun saying, "I might be out of spells, but I'm not out of shells." And that's kind of the gist of what this game is. It is a TRPG that blends classical wizards and fantasy magic with just like straight up special ops units, which is a fun idea all on its own, and it comes together with what I found to be some very humorous writing to make for a really fun time. That said, one thing this game lacks is like a serious challenge, to be honest with you, because while it does have difficulty settings and everything, once you've reached a certain point and you have everything unlocked and you can swap out perks as you need to, wrapping everything else up is essentially a puzzle at that point. Puzzles that have frankly already been solved, as I mentioned, those guides exist. So while I think the game has more to offer than that, it's just not like a deeply challenging tactical game. However, what it is very fun. So let's dive into that a little bit. First up, as I mentioned, the game does have a variety of difficulty modes, easy through hard most notably, but then after you pick one of those presets, you can go in and customize it further to your heart's desire. And this is more on like a per mission basis than anything else. But as I already mentioned, not a terribly challenging game, so unless you are deliberately tackling hard mode with intentionally underleveled characters, you're really just not going to encounter a challenge in that manner. Outside of challenges, you make up for yourself in utilizing abilities and things in fun ways, which comprises some of the game's own challenges, in fact. Though, while we're talking about settings and things, this is as good a place as any to mention the technical side of things, and simply put, I encountered no problems. I cannot even find a review on Steam that is claiming to have encountered any technical problems, and while I'm sure something to that effect exists somewhere for someone, it would seem that just isn't a noteworthy thing in regards to this game and seems to be extremely rare, which means the technical side of things seems to be in great shape. Moving on though, let's talk a bit about the story setup and what we can expect here. So the prologue of the game, the opening mission, puts us in the role of two different chronomancers. One of them, one of our characters, Zan, possesses the ability of foresight and the ability to rewind things, at least temporarily, which is going to form the bulk of what we're about to do. His companion, however, is on a whole nother level. Liz is able to manipulate the time scale to move so fast that no one can really see what she's doing. It's effectively instantaneous, like Superman style. And as two members of a special ops team, that's an incredibly useful ability to have. However, on this opening mission, things go sideways and you're forced to choose between helping a hostage or helping her, which ultimately means just saving the hostage. And this results in our teammates' capture, where time suddenly advances a few years after this, which is when Zan here finds out that his former teammate has resurfaced after being missing all these years since this attack, only to have joined a paramilitary group seemingly causing no shortage of terrorism, etc., and as a woman with her powers is extremely dangerous as a result. And so our mission becomes stopping her. However, it spirals from here into this grand sort of espionage conspiracy plot that was a lot of fun and honestly very well written. And while this is the kind of thing that is very subjective and no one's ever going to quite agree on the exact quality of it, I will say for my part, I loved the writing of this. I thought it was equal parts funny but also a compelling story story at the same time, and they really worked some great moments in there. Honestly, I would go so far as to say that despite this being a relatively small in scope tactical RPG, the story is absolutely one of the reasons to see this game through. But that brings us to the progression side of things. So progression systems here are relatively simple, but there's a fair few things to know. Basically, as we move through the main story, we're going to unlock more and more wizards to actually use, 5 of them in total, including Zan at the start, and each of these characters comes with their own playstyle and abilities. As we complete missions, these characters will gain experience and start leveling up, which is when we can start picking out perks. Perks are going to modify and upgrade their abilities in some pretty spectacular ways, which in unison with each other can sometimes result in extremely overpowered combos, allowing you to just wipe the floor with a map before their battle has even really began, to be honest. Though, while you will gain most of these through simply leveling up, there are some that are directly tied to story progression and, more importantly, character-specific dreams they have, where they're sort of working through what each of them individually is going through, and those will unlock like special perks and abilities and things sometimes, so not all of this is purely tied to leveling up, which is definitely worth knowing. Now, the other part of this is challenges, confidence, and outfits. Basically, every mission can be replayed after the fact, and you might want to do that because then you can go back and try to grab some of the challenges with your upgraded characters. These challenges, if completed on a per character basis, grant that character confidence as a currency, and you can then use this to unlock various outfits to use as that character. This is purely cosmetic and just a fun bit of customization to jump in on. And that's basically everything you need to know progression-wise. So from there, let's talk gameplay and ultimately combat, as in games like this, they are often one and the same. Again, just to reiterate, after you unlock things in the main mission, you can go back and replay them at any time, and from the main menu, you can actually mission select anything whenever, even missions you have not actually gotten to yet in the main story. And not only can you replay them, you can actually play them with characters that were not there the first time through. And while that's not terribly useful for challenges, it does allow an extra bit of customization in terms of tackling those challenges with characters they weren't necessarily designed around. Now, before we hop into the main stuff, it's probably worth a mention that this game does have user-generated content in the form of both a level editor that you can use yourself and also player-generated maps and things offered via Steam's Workshop. So if you ever get tired of the curated stuff, you can choose to interact with player-made content as well. But the game we're actually reviewing here is divided up into main missions, dreams, and those challenges. Main missions are pretty straightforward, your story progression. But then we have things like dreams and challenges. Now, dreams are somewhat tied into the main story, and then other times they're separate challenges altogether. So every one of your 5 characters throughout the story has an anxiety dream, which is like a specialized map designed specifically around that character in some way, which makes use, of course, of their specific abilities. And usually they tell a lot of story here at the same time. But in addition to this, there are also special dream missions, which are like practice missions that have special challenges associated with them, like some you simply have to survive for a set amount of time, that kind of thing. So there is content simply beyond the main story. But let's talk about what some of those missions entail and how it works. Now, as the game is called Tactical Breach Wizards, and you surely have seen on screen by now, you always kind of open up with breaching a room. In fact, each main mission is typically divided up into several little sub-missions, usually like 2 to 5 stages that are effectively little rooms you'll be breaking into. And this is where things get much, much more interesting, because while I think it is in fact accurate to describe this game as a series of elaborate puzzles where you're trying to find the solution to them, it's worth mentioning that these puzzles can be solved any kind of way. Now, I've played a lot of tactics games, and this tends to come up with games that have a more deterministic system. That is to say, when you take an action, a very specific thing happens, as opposed to, say, a % chance to hit. So with deterministic systems like that, oftentimes the combat itself can be very easily boiled down into a series of actions that have a series of very specific effects, which makes the puzzle aspect a little more on the nose. But honestly, with any tactics game, that's always kind of the case, even in non-deterministic systems. Now, I tell you all that simply because what Tactical Breach Wizards does to get around this is the fact that your objectives for any individual mission tend to be pretty straightforward. In fact, the chances of you failing them are relatively low, and that's where the individual confidence challenges come in, because these typically require you to play that mission in a much more specific way, which often is the puzzle, and these can all be done independently of each other, meaning that each of these stages on each of these missions tends to have multiple puzzles happening at the same time, even if it's possible to potentially complete all of them at once. And when you combine combos and stuff in such a way that either just feels really satisfying or results in like a near infinite chain of attacks and retribution upon your enemies, chucking them out windows as you go, it feels fantastic, which makes it no surprise to me that this game has been so highly regarded since its launch. But let's be a little more specific from there. So each of our characters, as I mentioned, has a very specific moveset. For instance, Zan is able to predict movements and can line up shots where other characters can push enemies into your line of fire, or you can simply prepare for where enemies are going to be when they, say, run away from their position or out of reinforcement doors, etc. And then at the cost of mana, you can also grant turns to other characters, because no matter which character you're using, there are some basic generalities. On any given turn, your character has an action that they can spend on any individual ability that requires it. Now, some abilities don't require actions or mana even to cast. Sometimes these are per encounter, or like Zan's Predictive Bolt, where you basically get to use it once per turn under normal circumstances. Some abilities, however, don't use actions. They only use, say, mana. Everyone typically starts with 1 mana, but if you run around the battlefield and complete objectives, you'll often gain more mana that you can then spend on these abilities, and that's important for pulling off some of these combos. For instance, you get a druid character later on who has the ability to cast a ice bolt at people that turns their armor and things brittle, which is great for tearing down high armor enemies. That ability does not cost an action, it only costs mana, so if you can gather up a bunch of mana before using that ability, you can stack that particular effect to devastating effect on high armor enemies. And that's just one example of several, because there's a variety of other effects and bits and pieces to simply get your head around. Now, probably the most common one that comes up is simply throwing people out the side of the individual missions. So things like windows, etc. can be used to just catapult people through, effectively removing them from the battlefield, provided you have an ability that can knock them back. This is where our character Jin comes in, as most of her abilities, in fact, have some level of knockback to them. Throwing people out of windows is kind of her specialty. However, later on, you start meeting enemies that have stability. This is basically a status effect that prevents a certain amount of knockback, but that can be worked around by simply having more knockback than they have stability, or using the abilities of a third character, Banks, who is able to actually cut through knockback resistance by applying an unsteady buff. But that's just one way to use that mechanic, because then we later on get a wizard named, I think it's Dal or Dal, who can deal extra knockback based on distance traveled via a charge ability, and then any excess knockback that isn't actually applied just cuts through as damage, which is an absolutely devastating ability in certain situations, especially when combined with her swap ability that lets her swap places with any individual unit on the battlefield, and when upgraded you can charge almost endlessly as long as you hit something without costing an action, and you can even swap with enemies you cannot actually see. And realistically, that's just the tip of the iceberg as far as some of these combos and abilities actually play out. There's a lot more than that, but even with just that, I think you start to get the idea about how complex some of this stuff can actually be. Now again, I wouldn't call any of this difficult, because once you have your head wrapped around it and you understand how all of these pieces fit together, I would actually go so far as to say a lot of this gets much, much easier, even without using a guide. And that's where the game starts to get really, really fun. But believe it or not, we're actually still not done, because there's a few more things I want to mention before we move on. Starting with reinforcement doors, which you may have noticed as we were talking here. Basically, every turn you can see doors in the surrounding stage where enemies will pop through. The number above that door is the number of enemies that will eventually come through it, but they only come through one at a time. If you can get your character to that door, you can actually magically seal it, preventing reinforcements, which is important as to avoid getting overwhelmed in many cases. And learning to capitalize upon your character's movement and how to move as far as you possibly can to get to these doors to shut them before they become a problem is definitely a key key skill to learn. But throughout all of that, should you actually make a mistake, it's not a huge deal, as no matter what, you can always rewind to the beginning of the turn you are currently on, which means absolutely everything you do can be foreseen using Zan's abilities, and then you can rewind it to try again. Meaning that the only time you really commit to a decision here is at the end of each turn, when you use Zan's foresee ability and see what the enemies are going to do and how things play out before the turn rolls over, and you decide whether or not to commit to that or not. And when you're dealing with that level of powerful abilities, as I mentioned, the game just does lack a certain degree of challenge, even if it is tremendously fun, which it is. Which brings me to the Steam Deck section finally. So the Steam Deck for this has a playable rating, which comes down to some awkward controller support and some small text. The small text I don't necessarily agree with. I don't think it's necessarily smaller than any other portion of Steam Deck games, but the controller support is definitely a little wonky. There are moments in the main story where you have to connect things on like a corkboard to investigate, and the cursor here is uncooperative to say the very least. So in short, can you play this on the Steam Deck? Absolutely. The only thing you might have to do is actually customize some of the controls personally, because the default layout does not feel great. So you can use Steam systems to get around that. And if you want to play this on the go, I would definitely look into it. But otherwise, it should be a pretty good time. Which brings me to my positives and negatives before we wrap this one up. Basically, the positives for me here were the writing. I thought it was great. I thought the story was interesting. I thought a lot of the back and forth was hilarious. And while that kind of thing is inherently very subjective, I do think it's a good reason to play this game. And when you combine that with the really great depth of the tactical combat here and all the ways you can play around with it in a way that, while might not necessarily be challenging, is still really, really fun, is perhaps unsurprisingly where this game really shines. But on the negative side, for me, I really only had the one, and that was just that because of everything at your disposal, it's simply just not a challenging game, which, truth be told, might make it a very great place for beginners to the genre to start out, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that this game leans very, very heavily on the puzzle side of tactics, which is always there in some form or fashion, but again, very prevalent here. Beyond that, though, any other negative I have is largely just trivial stuff, like, for instance, sometimes the damage prediction on enemies who have, like, armor and shields and everything on at the same time is woefully inaccurate, which is hardly unique to this game. You see that sometimes for sure, but there might be one or two little gripes here and there that are slightly annoying, if nothing else, so I wanted to mention them. But that brings me to my conclusion for this one. Tactical Breach Wizards is $20 US over on Steam and whatever that is regionally for you, and for $20 I think you're getting a tremendously fun game. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's one of the better TRPGs I've played. So if you find yourself with $20 to burn and you're looking for a fun tactics game, I think this one is definitely worth your time and you should absolutely consider playing it. Which is, of course, where we're going to wrap up this particular review. So I certainly hope you enjoyed it, found it informative. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know down below how you feel about this one. Not least of which, because this was a heavily viewer-requested review, so hoping to hear from some of you down below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.